Good afternoon. This is another in the series of lightning webinars. Today the topic is addressing problems with Scrum. So what do we mean by problems? The ones that we're going to talk about, the three that we're going to talk about, we think are perceived problems with Scrum. Some believe that these are real problems, that therefore Scrum is not good. But we think that these problems are really only perceived problems. At least if you're in a good situation, then Scrum will work, despite the so-called issues or problems. Some of them might be considered classic myths about Scrum. And some maybe are symptoms of Scrum being done badly. So we're going to go through these very quickly. If you have this kind of a problem, you probably need more help than we're going to provide in this short webinar. But at least we're giving you a bit of a start. Okay, what are the three problems that we're going to address today? Today, the idea that Scrum is a panacea or silver bullet. Today, the concern that Scrum has too many meetings or too many events, or too much time is spent on these events or meetings. And then, why so much transparency? Do we have to really be have things out in the open so much? Okay, the first one, the silver bullet idea. Some people feel that if we do Scrum, magically everything will be wonderful, everything will turn out perfectly, despite all the other aspects of the current reality. They think that Scrum will magically make the team win despite anything, simply and solely by doing Scrum. So that's a bit of a fantasy, not in our view correct. The truth, we do think Scrum can help quite a lot. We can certainly increase velocity of the team, the productivity of the team quite significantly. We do think indeed that hyperproductivity is quite achievable for almost any team. We not only can they increase the velocity, but also they can have these other characteristics. They can have for the team more fun, more happiness. They can have a higher quality of product. We can have more business value or more units of business value, you might say, per story point. We can work fewer hours. We can have a better life. We can have less stress. And we believe that all of these things are possible if we play well and professionally. All of these things are possible at the same time. But we think that you have to have certain basic conditions. And exactly what these conditions are debatable or not fully agreed, but a lot of them are relatively commonly agreed on. Okay, so what are some conditions? Here's a short list of A through G. So the team must have an important set of work. The team must have the ability, or someone around the team must have the ability to define that work well enough so that it can be done relatively efficiently or effectively. The team must want to do the work. Indeed, an inspired team would be great to have. The team must be willing to try Scrum. The team must have, and not just the team maybe, but also the organization, the courage to face the truth. Someone must know Scrum well enough to explain it reasonably accurately so that they can then do it. We think this is not typical for a beginning Scrum Master. And we think you need, or it really should have, a 100% allocated team and a stable team. Some more conditions. The team is not dysfunctional. One would think that would be kind of a joke, but dysfunctionality or dysfunctional teams are, at least can be relatively common. Depends on who puts them together. The team needs to be capable enough, a little bit different than what we were saying before about getting the requirements in. The team must have the willingness to identify enough impediments, and maybe good enough ones to get there. The team must be willing to, the team and the organization must be willing to identify and then address things and make them change so that the impediments get either mitigated or fixed. The team must have the thoughtfulness to add to Scrum usefully. Scrum by itself is not enough. And then finally, the team must have the ability to get decent feedback each sprint, probably from what I typically call the business stakeholders, but in some way or another, they get good feedback. They don't continue to build things that the customers won't want. They tend to build more things that the customers will want. So 2 additional minimal conditions, we think. The team should be trained together for 2 or 3 days, the whole team together, including the product owner, the Scrum Master. The team and the people around the team should have a good Agile coach for a good period of time. There is some debate about how long a good period of time might be, but that we have a coach, I think, is very well agreed in the community of at least of good practitioners of Scrum. Okay, let's go a little bit more depth. A capable team. What are the basics of that? So we think it means having a team of 7 in most full regular professional situations. That includes 1 full-time product owner, 1 full-time Scrum Master, and 5 implementers. A very typical ratio for the implementers would be, if it's software, 3 coders and 2 testers. And they don't need to be really a dream team, we don't think, to be successful, but they need to be fairly good at what they do and fairly good in comparison to the work that they're trying to accomplish. Obviously, some work can be very hard and very new, and you might need special people for that kind of situation. But for fairly normal work, they're at least fairly capable. Okay, so now we're on to the next issue, the too many meetings idea. In Scrum, as you know, in the Scrum Guide, we define 4 events or 4 meetings, true enough, and they're described somewhat. But what's one of the issues? Well, one of the issues is they're all professionals with lots of quote-unquote professional experience at having meetings that suck. They've got years of practice doing that. So they know how to go into that mode pretty easily, pretty naturally. Some of the people, either the people in the teams or the people around the teams, by nature dislike meetings. So that's not an entirely small issue. Some people will never be really team players, and they might even be on the team. So we've got that kind of issue as well. If they're not team players, the meeting is not likely to go well at all. So the Scrum idea is that we have the team, we have the meetings to enable the communication so that we can all work together much more effectively as a team, or with the team, or as a team with the rest of the organization. So we must take the time to convince them, the people in the team itself, and then the other people that might be attending the meetings. And one of the key root causes is we don't really try very much or very well to explain it to them well enough. By the way, the Scrum Guide calls them events and not meetings. Perhaps that's a small help. In any case, we need to explain about the meetings, the usefulness of the meetings again and again and again. It's been so beaten into their heads that meetings are useless that we have to show again and again the usefulness. Maybe after 5 years, that no longer needs to be proven. Anyway, we don't think beginning Scrum Masters are able or have enough experience really to do that very well typically. Okay, so the truth. The team events make things much more transparent. So are the people willing to tell the truth in the meetings? Telling many parts of the truth are quite okay. They're, as long as they can blame somebody else to talk objectively about what's going on outside the company. Lots of different things they can tell the truth about, but they can be uncomfortable about talking about the truth in certain situations. We'll get onto this more when we talk about the next subject, the transparency. So talking about problems, talking about how I'm not perfect, this can be a little tough. It can even hurt some people, particularly if it's not expressed well. One of the key things they need to learn is that by going slow, we'll go faster. So these events enable us to be smarter. Therefore, even though we have less time to do, as they typically call it, real work, even though they have less time to do the real work, yet they get more real work done because they're working smarter in that time. So by becoming smarter in the meetings, they therefore become more productive. Hence the quote there that you see, by going slow, we go faster. So some other key points. We have to run the meetings well. There are books written about how to run meetings well, so we won't go over all that stuff, but we'll make a few points here. Everyone needs to talk effectively or explain what they're trying to say in more effectively than they typically do. Similarly, on the reverse side, everybody needs to listen well to the other people, to the person that's talking at this moment. They need to they don't just hear the information, they need to use the information after the meeting. Okay, maybe not every single bit of information that they hear in the meeting, but in general, they're listening in order to use the information later. Um, and then eventually, at least, everyone sees the usefulness of the meeting, of the event, both for themselves personally, but also they see the usefulness for the team. So the meetings really are about, and they need to understand that it's about, more the team than the individual, although the individuals are going to be taking the action, at least very typically. Do we really have a team? So that's often the root cause for a lot of the problems with the meetings. We don't really have a team yet. They don't really believe that they're a team. They believe that they're a bunch of individuals working together maybe, but they're not really a team. So the meetings are not likely to be good if they don't feel like a real, as I usually call it, a real Scrum team. So if they don't care about team success, then they typically don't listen. Now, this issue of not feeling like a real team is often a very silent kind of problem. It doesn't express itself directly. You see it rather indirectly. Um, so a bit of a rhetorical question. If how many non-team players do we need to have before it's not a team? Something to think about. Okay, the rules. Often the rules are not well known, but if they know the rules, if they follow the rules effectively, then the meetings become much more effective. Um, so these are rules recommendations for each meeting. There are many of them, fairly well known in the Scrum community. Many of these suggested rules are not in the Scrum Guide, although some of them can be. So if the team doesn't know the rules, the quality of the meeting will go down. Okay, so let's look at some of these rules. So here are 4 examples of the kinds of rules that we were talking about. One example, the user stories should be estimated before the start of the sprint planning meeting. That will make the sprint planning meeting more effective. Another rule, the team has to have voted on the details of the stories. Are they good enough or not? The team needs to have voted on those details in regard to the, as some people are calling it now, the definition of ready. They need to have voted on those details before the sprint planning meeting starts. Therefore, if that's done, if that has happened, then the sprint planning meeting will be more successful. Next rule, the team members have updated their hours on the task before the daily scrum. Again, that will cause the daily scrum to be more effective. And then finally, that we will work mainly on one impediment together in the retrospective that's known ahead of time before the retrospective and considered kind of a rule of the retrospective. That tends to make the retrospective meeting more effective. The meetings in general need to be well run. We kind of indicated that before. And as we said, there are books about how to run meetings well. So the Scrum Master must become good at this. One key element, very, very common thing throughout Agile, is the idea of time boxes. So the Scrum Master must manage the time boxes in such a way that the meetings are more effective. Another key element is getting the talkative people to talk somewhat less and getting the quiet people to talk a bit more. That tends to make the meetings better. Anyway, this is an important, complex skill set for the Scrum Master, and usually not one that a beginning Scrum Master is good at yet. And then one final note, the Scrum Master doesn't get to be a dictator. So we're on now to the next item, too much transparency. They cry, they worry. So Scrum does try to force more of the truth out on the table. We do consider transparency one of the 3 key elements or requisites of the empirical process and so forth. So this is all well and good. Why is this a problem? Well, some organizations don't want to see their own impediments. Similarly, some team members need to learn how to be able to admit that they're not perfect. They need to admit their imperfections pretty much on a daily basis. Related to that, we need to learn how, both as individuals and as a culture, to avoid the blame game, to do it at least a lot less than we've been used to doing it. Not sure this is true of every culture, but it's quite a common thing in these different corporate cultures. Is this transparency a bug? In my view, it's not a bug; it's a feature, but it can be a difficult adjustment. What is one of the root causes? Well, at least in our opinion, from talking to many people over the years, somebody in their past, pretty much everybody in their past, has had a situation where they were punished, where they were transparent, maybe a little bit more than they typically would be, and then a manager, typically a manager, punished them, or at least it was perceived by them to have been punishment. Often the punishment was wrong, it was unfair, it was maybe even useless, but nonetheless it happened. And if it didn't happen to them, it happened to a close friend. So it's a very strong feeling embedded in them because it did actually happen. So they tend to feel the famous quote, you can't handle the truth. They tend to feel that. They tend to not want to reveal as much of the truth because they remember that hurt, that pain so well even today. So we have to at least accept that that is there for most of our people. But in a similar way, there's another angle to it. Some of us have been raised to be perfectionists. And so we kind of live in a fantasy world of being perfect. And it makes it tough on our egos to take criticism or even to admit to imperfections. So in both these cases, I think we need to have sympathy, both for them and for the situation. They have reasons for these different feelings, but this doesn't mean we can't get over these feelings largely of the past. So it requires courage, which is, as you know, one of the 5 key Scrum values. So over time, we must learn to tell a little bit more of the truth. And experience telling the truth will help. Just getting used to it, where nothing happens, nothing at least negative happens, will make it easier and easier over time to tell more and more of the truth. And at least enough of the truth so that the team and the organization can become better. Again, the value of doing this we must explain over and over again, as we said before. So the Scrum Master and any Agile advocate must explain the value of transparency. And then when we fall back into negative patterns, when we fall back into the blame game, the Scrum Master or others can help us stop doing that, and then hopefully get back to telling the truth and not fall back into it again. But we have to accept it's human nature to go back to old patterns that are well established. Okay, how could the truth help? If we see the truth, we're more likely to commit to the right amount in the sprint planning meeting. If we see the truth, the daily Scrum information can be more useful, and then we can help each other more effectively. If we see the truth, then the flaws in the product will be identified sooner, and then we can fix them sooner and at a lower cost. If we see the truth, we can identify the best impediment, quote unquote, to work on, and then fix it more quickly. If we see the truth, we won't have to waste so much energy pretending to be perfect, for example. And then people can be appreciated for who they really are, for the full human being, perfect and imperfect, or good and bad, for the full human being that they are, which is in general quite impressive, although we all have our imperfections. Okay, so two keys. At least we want to emphasize two things. We want to minimize the negative effects of the truth. For example, stop the blame game. And then we want to maximize the benefits, but often more the perceived benefits. That is to say, the perception of the benefits. We want to maximize that. So, for example, we can swarm and help each other get any user story unstuck more quickly. Okay, so overall summary across all 3 of them. A lot of what we're recommending is just explaining again and again and again and again why these are not so much problems and how then we can overcome them and what are the basic ideas behind them. So these repeated explanations, I think, are a big part of the game. But some of it's just by doing the right thing for a while and then having people see the benefits of doing the right thing. And then once they can connect doing the right thing with the benefits, then they are more, you might say, reinforced to do the right thing. Do we have people problems? Well, to me, a lot of these so-called problems are really, you might call them people problems. They're in the mind of people. They're not necessarily real in external reality outside their minds, but they are therefore real because they are issues or concerns in their minds. Anyway, so it's a lack of understanding in those people, hence the explaining and explaining and explaining. These are hard problems. Any kind of a people problem is a hard problem to work on, but nonetheless worthy to be worked on. And then once we have worked on them, once we have achieved some level of improvement, something that we can be proud about, that we have improved these things. Anyway, that's our relatively short webinar for today. Good luck. We believe you can do it. Good luck. Go have fun doing it. Thanks. Talk to you later.